Next up, we have another amazing group of individuals, a panel that, the name of it is, of the panel, A Cosmology of Equity, Understanding Race, Sacred Economics, and Systems Change. Bringing up to the stage, Reverend Dr. Diane Johnson.
Here, Mike.
Ms. Angela Glover Blackwell. Thank you. And my friend Gregory Mengel. You all take it from here.
So I'm just going to invite us to take a breath, because that was some extraordinary learning and sharing. So let's just notice ourselves, notice our bodies, that we're here in this place. And let's take 2 deep breaths together. Wow. So one of the things I am deeply appreciative about spirit and divine is that things, magic happens. And so given what has been said this morning has led us perfectly to this panel. And so I'm deeply and profoundly grateful and humble to moderate a conversation between 2 extraordinary people. One is Angela Glover Blackwell, who is CEO of PolicyLink and is an extraordinary change agent in the work that she's been doing for decades around equity and justice and society. And Gregory Mengel, who has been for the last 4 years creating an extraordinary opportunity called Beyond Separation, where whites come together in a learning community to really explore, discover issues of whiteness and white supremacy and being white in American culture, right? So the objective of our time is to have a conversation about the intersection and the relationship between individuals. It's like that gorgeous slide that was shared earlier from Movement Strategy Center about the nestled levels of transformation. Right? The metaphor that I often use is, Russian nesting dolls. What are those things called? Right. Russian nesting dolls, that's what they're called, right? So what are we doing internally, individually, familiarly, group-wise, organizationally, community, regionally, universally, right? And so the opportunity that we have today is to have a conversation around the relationships between all those layers: equity, fairness, inclusion, justice, opposing white supremacy, and creating a sacred economy, creating the we economy. Small conversation, right? Like, we'll finish this in no time. But so the first question I have, though, for you, Angela, is so often the framing of economics and finance is that it is neutral, right? The mythology is, it's numbers, it's neutral. So in the phenomenal work that you've done at PolicyLink in using inclusion, fairness, and justice as the core to how we build policies and institutions, what are the strategies that you've used to help dispel that mythology that economics is neutral?
Thank you. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here, my goodness, and I'm so glad I got here in time to hear the panel before it threw off everything that I think, not just today, but everything that I've ever thought. So, so I'm starting from a disadvantage now. I just have to say that. The organization that I work for, PolicyLink, exists to advance racial and economic equity and build a society in which we can all participate, prosper, and reach our full potential. In order to be able to do that, the first thing that we have to do is learn. We have to teach ourselves, we have to educate ourselves about how we got here. That if we ever think that we can just come in at this place and start moving out from here, knowing what we know to go forward, we are wasting our time. We have got to go back. And we have to go back for lots of things. We have to go back from before there was a country. We have to go back beyond that. But we can just go back and look at policy and learn a lot. And so at PolicyLink, while we try to do the whole backdrop of humanity and the struggle and how racism predated the founding of the country, we spend much more time just looking at policy. And the notion that markets and finance are neutral is completely defied by the reality of how policy has operated. And so we can't really come up with policy strategies or a narrative about what it is we're trying to do if we can't be honest with ourselves about how deliberate the process was of getting us to the place that we are now. It was a deliberate process. It was informed by policy. It was enabled by policy and strategy. There is a book out now, The Color of Law. Any of you heard about it or seen it? Yay. Yeah. The Color of Law really makes this point, particularly around housing and space and how we ended up in the spaces that we're in this country. And if you think about the housing crisis right here in Oakland, California, we don't have to go beyond our own community. There is a policy story about why it is that when black people came here as part of the Great Migration, they ended up in West Oakland. That wasn't just a choice. There weren't other choices. That was the space that had been designated. It had been designated by policy. The fact that people were able to buy homes or not buy homes had everything to do with the policy around mortgages being available, not available for black people, not available for black people who wanted to buy in other parts of Oakland. That when you look at how that got reinforced as redlining continued, but as it got reinforced in terms of where businesses could operate, where children could go to school, all of that got put in place through policy that wanted to isolate black people from white people, but also isolate black people from expanded opportunity. And so without understanding that, you can't just drop in now and say we have a gentrification problem in Oakland, let's try to figure out how to solve that. Because it didn't just happen. We've got to look at what was the policy platform that was put in place? How do we disrupt that? How do we compensate for it? How do we make up for it? How do we take that into account? And then what happens by policy is policies happen, they create circumstance, and then the circumstance becomes real, so that people feel ownership over West Oakland. That is a community. It's not just something that was imposed on the people who live there, it becomes a community. And so policy, as you're trying to think about how to get out of it, has to understand that. That needs to be honored. That needs to be respected. So when we think about what the strategies are, the impact of policy, not just its negative, but its realities, has to be taken into account as well. And so my answer to your question is the way that you begin is to understand the history, to understand the role of interventions, to understand there is no such thing as a free market. And when you look at the challenge we have right here in Oakland, this represents a market failure. The housing crisis is a market failure. Therefore, you cannot expect tweaks with the market to solve that problem. You have a market failure, therefore you need an intervention that is beyond what the market will ever do on its own. I'll stop, because you're going to ask other questions, and I'm dying to hear from my stage mate.
So, Greg, one of the things that that resonates for the connection between previous speakers and this panel, and I'm thinking about Amaka's comment about in that first stage where she talks about acknowledge and repair. And so I immediately think that beyond separation is that my understanding of the conversations and the learning that you have is related to acknowledge and repair of whites in terms of what has happened around racism and white supremacy. So I'm curious, in the 4 years that you've been doing Beyond Separation, what learnings have you seen in the individuals participating? And maybe you want to give also just a brief, well, I'm going to ask this way. How many people have either gone through or know about Beyond Separation? Okay, so they're not that, okay. So then you should give a little bit of sense.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to say thank you to the organizers for allowing me to be here, and to you two for allowing me to be on your panel. I'm pretty humbled by that. And I also want to say, feels really important to say that Beyond Separation is not me. It's three of us. We're a team. Angela Seven and Alana Isaacs and myself co-created this program. And we did it with a lot of support from a larger community of people, including Conda Mason, including Ashara Ekendayu, including Sonia Renee Taylor, Juanita Brown, and my amazing husband, Melvin Escobar, who's right there. So that said, what was your question again?
So,
acknowledging and repairing.
Yes.
Acknowledging and repairing, yes.
What have you, and also just talk about what the 8 weeks and what, so people have a sense about the work.
Right, yeah. So definitely it is fundamental that we begin with the history, that we begin with where we came from, especially as white people, because we don't know where we came from in so many ways. So we don't know who we are, right? We don't know what it means to be white people, right? We just think we're people, right? And so there's so many layers of invisible stuff that we have to begin to unearth. And history is a great place to start looking at that and start looking at the ways in which, this enormous accumulated imbalance of different kinds of wealth has happened. I really took note of what was said about the enormous untapped wealth of the people whose ancestors went through enslavement and built up this enormous consciousness wealth. And I was immediately thinking, and the other side, those of us whose ancestors accepted the wages of whiteness as compensation, right? What we missed, in terms of knowing ourselves, in terms of understanding our lineages. We often we left behind our ancestors in that process of racing towards some kind of imagined homogeneity or assimilation into whiteness because it promised shiny things for us. And those were really empty things. They turned out to be empty things. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. But getting people to begin to look at who we are, how we got here in terms of being white people, in terms of settler colonialism, in terms of the process of creating whiteness in opposition to first or at the same time in terms of the native people who were here, in terms of the Africans who were being stolen from their homeland and brought here. And then, seeing how through that process, we've been enculturated to see ourselves in a certain way, to have a certain sense of entitlement, and to not know who we are.
Thank you. So Angela, I want to, this notion of, the notion of new learnings, literally conceptualizing and framing our time, our intention, our consciousness. In your work, what are you finding are the critical learnings, skills, competencies that individuals need to gather in order to do the work of creating, co-creating the we economy?
We do need to co-create the we economy. It will only be a we economy if we co-create it. And that requires so much humility and so much resolve at the same time. I must say that I am constantly, as a person who deals in policy, and that's my choice to do it, and I think it's an important and an honorable choice because you can change a lot with policy. But the struggle of it is by definition reformist. It is to engage in policy is to take the thing as it is and to try to tweak it and change it, sometimes radically and sometimes in a transformational way, but it is within. It is within. There is something about it that is inherently reformist. And I did not start off being a reformist. I started off as a revolutionary. No question. I started off as a revolutionary. And I find at this moment that from where I sit now, I don't know what revolution is. We are so far from revolution that I feel that we've got to do some reforming to get ourselves in a position so that we can imagine what the revolution is. That somehow I have to step over here. I have to remove some assumptions, have to remove some habits, have to remove some acceptances to be able to do something completely different. The cooperative movement is a stepping over here in a reform way so that we can own collectively. But we have to be in the habit of owning collectively before we can begin to really know when the revolution happens, where does collective ownership fit in there? That we are so far from where we need to be, that we have to understand what it means to abolish police. To abolish police, but are we just going to abolish it tomorrow, or do we have to grab back those things that have to do with community building that we have ceded to police? Those things that have to do with how we treat people with mental challenges, grabbing back so much of what we think of as safety and community. Those things can happen through reform, and if we reform enough, we can begin to imagine abolition. But it's hard to imagine abolition until you take some steps. So when you ask me this question, I have to say that only we can create the we economy, but it requires understanding what do we know that we want to do? What kind of people are committed to that? How do we build solidarity among the people who have a notion about where we're going so that we can stand on the platform of that solidarity as we try to go beyond that? One other thing I want to say I've been thinking about a lot, and the conversation right before just reinforced it for me. What is the role of wealth as we think about it from where we stand now? And how do we begin to both redefine it as we critique it? We've got to critique it so that people can see what they're missing, but we also have to redefine some things along the way. One of the things that we say at PolicyLink, and we've been saying it for many years, is given the extreme crisis of capitalism particularly as practiced in this country now, and the rapidly shifting demographics in this country, people of color becoming the majority, and people being disproportionately left behind within the communities of color that are becoming the majority. That when you think about the future in this country, the fate of the nation is dependent on what happens to the people who are being disproportionately left behind. And the economy will not thrive if it doesn't figure out a way how to tap the asset. This is an extraordinary gift to a country that doesn't even deserve that gift. Doesn't even deserve that gift. And as you try to move from there, we say equity, just and fair inclusion in a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential is the superior growth model. Because it's only by getting equity right that we can even think about growth. But when I say growth, it cannot mean as we think about it now. If you have equity, you don't have the kind of growth you have now. It's a completely different kind of growth. We don't really know what that looks like. And so we have so much that we have to work through as we have enough of a vision that we know who the we is, that the we has enough respect for our differences, that we can be a we while we struggle in what may be a wilderness, and that we find those places where we can stand and have some respite as we get ready for the next battle.
Yes. So, Greg, when we think about the processes of change that we have the opportunity to go through individually as well as community-wise, when we think about the work of Beyond Separation, what instills and supports going through the pain of being someone who's white? Not that you have to speak for the entire white population, right?
I will try not to do that. I heard you, Angela, speaking about the we, and the thoughts that were coming to my mind were, the socialization process that sort of kills that we-ness part of us, right? Or stifles it, right? It's so hard. It's been really hard for me to tap in to we-ness, because the conditioning around I-ness, around you need to show that you're worthy yourself to exist, it is deep and starts very young. So one of the most important things that we do is we work together. Like, it's so easy to imagine, oh, I need to learn about racism and white supremacy. Well, I'll read this book and I'll watch this film or whatever. And we believe that it's super crucial that we do the work together collectively, because it is a collective wound, even like a soul wound, that it's so hard to connect, right? And the idea, all the aspects of racism and white supremacy make it hard for us to connect, not only to people of color for like many obvious reasons, but to each other and to our own integrity, right? And so bringing people, like building community actively in the room, and also getting into our bodies is really, really huge, because we want to do the work here, and we feel like we're doing the work when we're doing the work here. And again, switching back from we to I, for the good reason, to use I statements, that's been a huge learning for me that I've gotten from my collaborators, is really the incalculable value of doing the work down here when I don't feel like I'm doing anything, but like things are happening that you sort of notice later, right? Or really gradually. But that aspect of the work is so much more vital for the long-term transformation that we have to go through.
Thank you. So I'm having 5 million questions running through my mind. Is anyone else having that experience? I'm so curious, though, is how, if we're moving from being reformists to revolutionaries, what assists us in loving one another?
You had the love expert on the stage before.
But in your work, but I think what is interesting,
That's
where,
right, yeah.
so let me ask this. So where have you seen love show up in your work as
There's a lot of love.
reformist?
There's a lot of love in the work, but I'm just going to say this. My staff would be so angry with me. I am not comfortable with the word love. I'm not. I'm a loving person. I think I love a lot of people, but we often throw it around in ways in which we don't mean it. And I just got a definition, literally sitting over there. I got one I could work with. I got one I could work with. I've not been comfortable with love in my work because I haven't wanted to be disingenuous. I haven't wanted to be phony. I haven't wanted to just appeal to a moment that we're in where people are talking about love. If I can't really own it and feel it within the context of the work, I just want to let others talk about it. But when I just sat there and heard this notion of it takes my love to help the other to be all that that person could be, I immediately thought about it in relationship to the people I love right up close, my children, my husband, my family, and that's how I love them. That is how I love them every day. I love them thinking about the best that they can be, the best that they want to be, and how I can help them do that. And so I could translate that to my work. That was a definition that I could use. In my work, I am trying to help others see a future that they cannot see, or if they see it, to be able to help them be part of being there. In that context, I can think about love. So up until a few minutes ago, I couldn't have answered your question. But now I at least can move to that space because that space is helpful. I also had an experience over the weekend where I found out some things about my heritage back to slavery. And in finding it out, and it's quite exciting, and I'm just so full of it now to have this information, but I was reminded that we are all Africans. That we are all Africans. And the fact that we are all Africans should make that struggle that you've described not so much of a struggle, because we are all Africans. There's all this stuff that's going on. There's all this stuff that's going on, and it has to do with visual differences that aren't really that different. It has to do with experiences that are very different. It has to do with oppression and power, and we've done a lot to be able to distort the fact that we all start from the same place. We are all Africans. And so as I try to combine that notion of the social constructs which we let get in our way, and that we do have to bring compassion to our work with others. And some people don't deserve our compassion. And what do you do with that? And is that a false statement? I don't know. I know one person who I know does not deserve my compassion. So we got one for sure. We got one outlier. But we know that's even bigger. We know that's much bigger than that. So your question was, where does love fit in my work? Love has found a place in my work that I can articulate just this morning. I have always understood that I was working from a place of care, that I was working from a place of better, how I was working from a place of do the right thing. And if you just bring do the right thing to every interaction, every decision you make, it's filled with love. And when you are trying to create a better society, when you're trying to right the wrongs, when you're trying to empower those who have the power but can't see it because of all the garbage, you have to use language that sometimes doesn't sound so loving, because what we need to be is jarred. But as we're jarring, underneath it is always about a better place.
So as we acknowledge that there might be some that where it's really challenging or for us to share our compassion and share our love, right? So I have a question. In our individual internal work, what are some of the practices that assist you in building capacity for love, building capacity for compassion, building capacity for self-love and self-compassion? Easy question.
Yeah. So, I mean, one answer is just your regular old meditation practices, which I engage in. I attend the East Bay Meditation Center, and it's an amazing place. I recommend it to everybody. And then I'm also involved in an organization called the Untraining. I teach with them. They have a program called Untraining White Liberal Racism. And they have a specific practice that they teach their participants, which is called a multidimensionality practice. It was developed by Rita Shimon and Robert Horton, who are the founders of the Untraining. And it's really about, it's a kind of a meditation practice that is really about connecting in with our basic goodness and holding it multidimensionally with all the other truths that seem to indicate something other than goodness in terms of how we're positioned in this brutal, violent, white supremacist society that we're benefiting from.
I want to ask the group, how many of you have some type of meditative or contemplative practice? Raise your hand. So look around. Just look around. Look around. Okay. Now, I might offer that there's some relationship between all those hands that were held up and the fact that we're here. just a minor, just an observation. So, and this is actually, I think, a critical question, which is, it's almost like we're speaking to a particular range of communities are here in this room. Where is the opportunity to help people understand that there is a relationship between some kind of practice, whether we call it spiritual or not? We know sometimes the S word is not allowed, and especially I think, in what I've observed and experienced in the world of finance and policy, the S word is definitely not allowed. So where are the opportunities, or where are the access points where we can help people understand the relationship between spirituality, contemplative practice, love, et cetera, and those who are like, to the head, don't give me any of that woo-woo stuff, right? Like, how many of us have experienced that? Oh, it's really, you're so woo-woo. What is your, like, let's just get back to business. Another small question.
We cannot get to where it is we want to go if people like the ones in this room, and people like the ones in this room, that's a huge number. I mean, they're the ones in the room, but they're people who share so much of what you believe and hold dear, who make up a huge number. We have to use your discipline and your aspirations and your deep understanding of the unity of us all to be able to have something that's going to sound very crass, the political will to get where we need to go. We can't get the political and public will for what it is we want if we can't get others to shake out of their hate and their confusion. I don't understand why they have it. That's not true. I don't understand why they hold on to it. I know why they have it. I don't understand why they hold on to it. It is such a short-sighted, ignorant thing to do, and the alternative is so beautiful, so inclusive, and so full of promise that it just makes no sense. But we've got to figure out a way to talk to people. I spend my time talking to people, and I try to talk to them no matter who they are or where they're beginning, in a place of universality. I often think, I know that the universal values that we hold are the same. And how do I understand the way you have distorted it so that you're in this place, but try to find that universal value to be able to find a place where we can really talk. But we need to do a lot more than that. We need to get out of our comfort zones and make some commitments to some outcomes that we want to achieve, and then ask, what role do all of us have to play in and outside of our comfort zones to be able to achieve those results, and hold ourselves collectively accountable for doing that. And in order for that to happen, we very much have to tap into the spiritual. We have to tap into love. We have to tap into the universal. We have to tap into the compassion. And I don't think that a lot of people know how to do that. They're afraid. They're afraid to do it. There are a lot of people who don't share the language that you have here who do it every day. Right. And there are a lot of people who share the language that you have here and never do it. And then there are people who are not even close. And the only way that we're going to really have enough of it, we need a different narrative about ourselves, a different narrative about our future, a different narrative about how we're going to get there. The only way we're going to create that narrative and move out on it is if we find the ability to get centered, own it, and then move from there out into the world, not afraid that being with someone who is not centered is going to get you off your center. Not afraid that being with somebody who has a hateful attitude about something that you cherish is going to cause you to be a hater. Not afraid that walking with someone who views money and wealth in a completely different way is going to cause you to become corrupt. Get centered, but don't just stay centered. Use that center to go out and create something else.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing. I just want to make sure I get this in, that a lot of the work that we're doing with folks and with ourselves, whether it be our contemplative practice, whether it be our community building, whether it be our getting into our body, is getting in touch with what's at stake for us, right? As white people, to transform this system, right? Because it is benefiting us in the terms of the shiny things, but on a so much deeper level, it is not.
That is so true.
So can we turn up the lights? Can I ask? Yeah, I see. I'm going to change some things. So can we turn up the lights so people can actually see one another? Because what I want us to do now is I want us to get into threes, not just twos, threes. And this question of our comfort zones, this question of purpose, this question of calling. I want us to spend, oh, thank you. Ooh, yay. Oh, faces, yay. So I want us to practice some magic, and we're going to extend time. And so we're going to use 9 minutes brilliantly. So how many of you have been a child? Okay, right? When you're a child, when you're listening to someone's stories, what's the level of awareness that you have when you're listening to a story, right? Right? That's the level of attention and energy I want you to bring to the other two people that you're listening to, right? So I want, in your pods of 3, I want you to spend 9 minutes thinking, what is one thing that you are willing to do, either are doing or willing to do, that's going to continue to put you in that state of discomfort, in that state of learning, in that state of purpose that's going to allow us to continue to create the revolution in 3 minutes, right? But you'd be amazed about what can happen with intention and time, right? So everyone has some kind of device, so I'm going to set a timer to 3 minutes, so everyone has 3 minutes. Okay, go. Yeah. So we have a little bit of time. There's a mic. I think there's a mic right there. And I want to invite us to share something that is in your heart as well as in your mind. And so that might be a question to either of these two brilliant people, or it might be a comment. And I am going to do something that I like to do as moderator, which is to do a privileged stack, which means that I'm going to invite people who are traditionally not allowed to speak first. So I'm going to ask for men and women of color and LGBTQ and those to stand at the mic first. And that's intention, and if you have questions about that, you can come talk to me later. Just notice how that feels, right? But it's about consciousness and intention and power and sharing power. So, great. And we have about 10 minutes left for this sharing part. And say your name, too.
I belong in that category, too. Yeah, thanks. Hi, we're the Redwoods. We're 6 people living co-consciously in one body. We identify as multiple. It's a preferred term to multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. We're also transgender. We make collaborative consensus-based decisions on decisions like transition, hormones, and dress. This is the we economy in one body. And there's a lot of us. It's 1% to 3% of the population. It's like being trans maybe 30 years ago. It's a horror movie. It's a trope. It doesn't exist. Make it go away. We're here. And so one of the things I wanted to share about that as it intersects with race. Go ahead, Z. Hi, this is Z. That was Allie talking. Thanks, Allie. So we were in a psych ward at one point. We said, hey, might as well go see what the system has to offer us. And the nurse turned to us and said, don't take anything they offer you. I've never seen anything medication-wise help anyone like you. So when the clinicians asked us, what do you want to do? We said, we want to sing, we want to dance, we want to meditate. And so we've done a lot of trauma healing work. But one of the greatest gifts that we received was a young black woman came up to us who was in the psych ward for her 14th time. And she was in a violent situation, and she was just bopping back and forth between domestic violence and this situation. She came up to me and she said, hey, we're actually 12 people in one body. Don't tell anyone. But let me tell you how to work. Sit down with each other, have a meeting, talk about it. And now I'm here, I'm coming out to thousands of people, I'm speaking around the country, and this woman, I don't know where she is. It's 1% to 3% of the population in general, but in the homeless population, it's 20% to 30% is the estimated population. But you want to talk about systems thinkers? You want to talk about collective solutions? We live in an ecology where we throw away the most valuable seeds, and we call them weeds. There's also, one last piece I want to share is that in cosmology, there's also hearing voices. So we all live in the body, but we also have access to other planes, and that's often called schizophrenia. We don't identify with that, but in other cultures, if at a certain age you didn't start hearing voices, then it was a point of crisis. Right. So really, who's under the bridge who we're missing out on hearing from? And so let's help them right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to say, but you made space for those of us to get up here, and since I'm a queer woman of color, I just stood up, and I think it's important. So I'll just talk for a second until I figure out what to say, and I want to thank you all. Angela, I've seen you speak a number of times, and I am always so moved by what you offer as a gift to your audiences, and so I'm excited to see you again. Hope I continue to see you speak. And I've learned a lot so far. I'm sitting here with some friends and colleagues who I know, and I'm just like, wow, I'm just trying to run a business, you know. And here I am, like, all my brain is being exploded, and I am just really, and the thing that I decided to share, I mean, I'm here as an entrepreneur, but at the same time, the thing that I decided to share with my group is what's going on in my community, like we're in my neighborhood and in my daughter's school, and you know, at Oakland Public School, and how we're seeing all the demographic shifts and all of these things. And I'm in a place where my daughter is being so lifted up academically in this school, and her teachers are fantastic. And my wife and I don't feel welcome in that school. It's a place where there is a lot of wonderful things going on, but those things are kind of being hoarded in the school, and then no one's talking about how our privilege as a good school in Oakland can be shifted and be shared in a way that is meaningful. And so here I am, like, thinking about all these things in a place where there's a lot of people not thinking about those things. And what I want to do is just be like, forget it, I'm going to send my daughter to a different school where there's more of this, where we're talking about this. But when you posed that question, Diane, about what are you willing to do, I'm like, well, I guess I better keep showing up in this school, because they need this thinking and this feeling. So there's going to be more uncomfortable PTA meetings in their future.
So I want us to thank this amazing Angela and Greg. It's an honor.